Here, this time bringing you some huge news about Avowed, Obsidian's genre shift for Pillars of Eternity, and I'm really excited to actually make this video because the recent Gamescom showcase that they did that I've been waiting all week for myself finally happened, and it was worth the wait, in my opinion at least, because they dropped some very, very cool stuff. Now, I want to kick this off with what I would say is the most important reveal of the entire thing, because they confirmed that Avowed actually takes place after Pillars of Eternity 2. And we know that specifically because in their showcase, they talked a lot about the god Aothis and the events at Ukaizo, which formed the end game for Pillars of Eternity 2. So we now know that this game happens afterwards, and we even saw some of the ramifications from it in the quest they did. And the method of delivery, so to speak, for the nature of all these reveals was through a godlike that we have not seen before, a godlike of Aothis. Now, for those unaware, godlike are effectively like divine children. The gods give unborn children of all different races what they call a chime, and that effectively turns them into a representation of whatever god did that. And here we see a godlike of Aothis, which has not made an appearance in other games anywhere, so this is a huge deal because of the impact that Aothis had on the entire world at the end of Pillars of Eternity 2. So some minor spoilers for that game here, but if you're unaware, basically what happened is that the god Aothis halted the cycle of rebirth and reincarnation by destroying a bunch of metaphysical machinery that was controlling the process, or guiding the flow of it, if you want to get a little more specific. But it had been doing so for so long that the wheel could not function without this very real machinery anymore. And he did this because the entirety of it was sort of built on a lie that you uncover over the story of those games. But the big thing here is simply that that had like earth-shattering levels of implication, and the fact that Avowed is not only set after that, but appears to be directly dealing with the consequences of that, makes me so much more interested in this game than I already was, and I was already pretty interested just because it was Pillars of Eternity. So if you couldn't tell by the nature of this video, I'm very excited about that. Easily the biggest thing about this update. But they did cover a whole lot of other stuff, so let's get into that as well. Now, right away, this gameplay showcase is effectively a quest towards the beginning of the game that they described as the first dungeon. We are there looking for a missing expedition, which is why we're interacting with the Oracle here, or the godlike of Aothis. Now, they use this initial conversation to explain some things. For starters, we see that Arcane Scholar tag in dialogue. This is actually one of the 5 available backgrounds for our character. So we know there's going to be backgrounds, and that at the very least they're going to be shaping dialogue decisions, if not outright having an effect on other things like, say, stats. They also wanted to use this to highlight some of their dialogue system, and if you couldn't tell by the intro of this video, PoE here has a very, I would say, in-depth lore. There's a lot to it. I myself actually made a whole lore series for the games because I enjoyed it so much, but even I can admit it's a lot to know. And so their dialogue system aims to tackle that by, rather than dumping a bunch of exposition on you, using a sort of just highlight word system where if you encounter anything you're unfamiliar with, you can highlight it in dialogue and bring up like descriptions and explanations of what things are, so they can share that for the people who need to know what it is without making conversations excessively wordy as a result of having to explain all of that. Now, another thing we see in dialogue was kind of a given, but these are basically attribute-based skill checks based on, of course, things like might or intellect. Those will pop up in conversation and give you different options in addition to your backgrounds as well. Now, from there, as we start moving through the dungeon of this one, they start explaining some of the interactions we can expect along the way. For starters, there will be interactables within the environment, things you can break down with a sword, or later on, they both confirmed the existence of grenades and environmental objects that are affected by them. So regardless of how you build your character, we can throw grenades, which I thought was a nice touch. Now, in regards to some of these environmental interactions, we actually hear the Oracle specifically comment on us interacting with them here, which makes me wonder if that was a scripted moment or if there will be like regular occurrences of things like that happening. Now, while they were getting to some of those objects in the environment, they also explained that they have built a lot of their spaces to be very vertical in nature. They wanted upward movement to be a big thing, so they could make use of their parkour system that they called it, which I thought was interesting. But basically, you're going to want to look up a lot to find a lot of this stuff and see what you can and cannot get up to and under, perhaps, which honestly I kind of liked because it means they're making full use of the 3D space as opposed to the isometric originals. if you're gonna switch genres, you may as well make the most of it as far as I'm concerned. Now, another thing they showed in the environment in particular were, I would say, more or less things that were expected, like little small puzzles where you have to lift up gates and things by interacting with what they referred to as essence generators. Basically, you charge these generators in some fashion with like electricity from their example, and they will of course move the environment in some way and allow you to pass. Just basically small little puzzles that you can sort out. But that's not all. With this being a full gameplay showcase, we got a good look at the UI and things like attributes, the inventory, some more on the skill trees in particular. So on the attribute side of things, pretty much what you see is what you get, but it does confirm that this is a big RPG alongside what they showed in combat as well. Now, I mention that specifically because while this is an RPG in first or third person, it's still going to have a lot of stats and numbers behind the combat, and as a result, it's not exactly going to be a visceral combat simulator, but you can see that they're trying to make the most of it. Now, what I really wanted to talk about here was they look at the ability trees. So we got some looks at the wizard one in particular because that's what they were playing, and they showed off some examples of abilities and how they've weaved them into the tree. So as we already know from previous reveals, they are taking all of the classes from Pillars of Eternity and kind of rolling them into more streamlined roles, frankly. So while there won't be as many classes to choose from, it does look from this skill tree alone, however, like they're trying to pull a lot of that stuff in as much as they can. And they gave a few examples of specific abilities for this showcase that they were using, including an interaction with a passive ability called Blood Magic that allows you to siphon your own health to fuel your spells if you're out of your spell resource. But they had that in combination with a spell that also gave them life back. So it was siphoning health from the enemies to recharge your own. And they kind of explained how that would work as a combo. And then they showed like basic shield spells and whatnot. And we got a look at a lot of animations in combat for those abilities at the same time, which I think was pretty promising overall. But obviously, without seeing the other skill trees and everything we could get up to, it's hard to say definitively there. But let's talk a little bit about what they showed in combat here. So right away, we see them perform a sneak attack with what I can only describe as like a Halo energy sword. But we also get to see them engaging in combat in full motion. That is to say, everything is moving. We get to see how the companion that you have with you interacts and can combo off of your abilities and also interact with the environment on their own in some ways, as we see Kai here burn down a barrier at one point. But a lot of the combat really seemed to come down to combos from both you and the enemy as well. So in multiple instances, we saw enemies healing up other enemies, meaning that you have to take down the healer so they're not just perpetually healing their charges up to full, while also dealing with other enemies surrounding and coming at you with their own abilities. So that's a big part of that. But on the player side of things, this comes down to weaving whatever your chosen weapon style is with, of course, your actual abilities. Now, from the UI here, it looked like you had 4 active abilities, but I don't know how set in stone that is, or if the UI for PC will be the same, etc. So it's not like that is definitive, but that is what we saw here. But while this was pretty early in the game, we saw enemies doing things like using shields. You have to power attack your way through, and another thing you could do was build up a stun meter on larger enemies in particular that once full, you could then execute a special attack on. And that was in addition to you activating skills and abilities from Kai specifically and kind of giving him some basic orders in combat as well. And it looked decent enough for an RPG. What I will say combat-wise is that I can tell that they are at least trying to capture the spirit of Pillars of Eternity with the combat system, which I can certainly appreciate the effort on. But I think that is just about going to do it for this particular video and the showcase of the dungeon they put together. A lot of really exciting reveals for me at least, and I was excited to share those with you, the viewer, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Now that said, if you're unaware, Avowed was fairly recently pushed back to February 18th in 2025, which is its official release date. So it's still a little ways off, but the more I see of this game and the more I can tell that they are reacting to feedback and stuff from their prior showings, the more excited I get for it. And with the lore reveals about it following Pillars of Eternity 2, I'm even more pumped about this. Easily one of my most anticipated games at this point, so expect me to cover it a ton, both now and after its release. But that is going to do it for today. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing